What is up, Mets fans? Welcome back to a special episode of the Mets'd podcast. We are joined today by Will Sammon, beat writer of The Athletic for the New York Mets. Will, thanks for joining us. Can't wait to talk some Mets with you.
Hey guys, good to be on with you.
Yeah, good to see you too, Will. So we're coming off recording this for you guys Friday morning, coming out Saturday. So we just watched Jonah Tong have a great bounce back performance against the Padres. What did you see from Tong, and what do you see as the Mets internal brass's confidence in Tong moving forward for another possibly big start next week and possibly anything after that?
Well, I think first you have to acknowledge that it's probably pretty hard to do what he did, right? Like he had one of the worst starts that one could really envision having. He did not get past the first inning. He only recorded the first two outs of the game. So that's really hard to then go back and the week after and arguably face a better team, right? A better hitting team in the San Diego Padres and try to help win a game where all these games matter so much to the Mets inside of the final 2 weeks. Like that's extremely hard for a 22-year-old person to do. And so acknowledging that, the first part was he exemplified like why people are so high on his character is because he can be that type of person who could persevere and accomplish that sort of thing. So I think that's first. And then secondly, just the idea that he was a lot more convicted and a lot more aggressive in the strike zone, particularly with his fastball. I thought that was great to see. And I felt like as the game went on, that became even sort of more clear, right? Like we saw him do that. We saw him elevate the fastball even out of the zone, particularly that at bat against Manny Machado really stood out to me where he's hammering high fastballs and it's Manny Machado. So you think eventually like, hey, I'm not really sure about this, but he ends up striking the guy out. And I thought that was a key out there. It was pretty impressive. And also just like the idea of using all of his pitches, right? Because I feel like when I spoke with rival scouts when he got called up, and especially after that start against the Rangers, they were like, whoa, like maybe we should not be seeing this guy in the major leagues because whether you felt good about the third pitch or you didn't feel good about it, or you were saying to yourself, like, well, he didn't really need it in the minor league, so that's why he wasn't throwing it. The point is that he wasn't throwing it. And so if you're going to the major leagues and you're not really throwing it as much, that could be problematic. And so I wanted to see him throw the changeup in ways that made more sense, but I also wanted to see the breaking ball, the curveball or the slider a little bit more. And we did see that. We saw that a fairly solid percentage. And again, I didn't expect to see it much more than that because it was the Padres and they're a team that does not really fare that great against fastballs. And Tong's fastball is great. So, like, why wouldn't he want to utilize that pitch and be aggressive with it? But I just thought the complete showing was just really great to see, like from all angles from Jonah Tong.
From a mental side, it seems like Jonah Tong's extremely tough or at least extremely loose. Was there anybody in the clubhouse or anybody on the team that after that Rangers start really got to him and get to talk it through?
Well, I thought that like every conversation I had about Jonah Tong with the veterans in the clubhouse, they all had a story to tell me about like them bringing it up to him. And sometimes like I hear that I'm like, okay, yeah, sure. But like, no, they were pretty genuine about it. Like Ryan Stanek comes to mind, Sean Manaea, Brendan Nimmo, and those are just three guys off the top of my head. There were plenty of others. And I even asked after the game, I spoke to Jonah Tong and I said like, a lot of these times I feel like with a young guy in particular, like in your shoes, I can imagine like hearing from 15 or 20 different people, like all these things, and it's not probably registering as much. So I even asked him like, hey, like, was there one person in particular where like that message actually resonated the most to you? And he's kind of stopped me and he was like, you know what? I get what you're saying. And that's usually the case where like all these people, all these coaches, all these players, it's right after the game. You're not really taking in everything that they're saying. But in this case, I really was. Like I was absorbing all the information that these guys were saying. And I can tell you like all these things that each and one of them told me. And it was even some guys that I didn't really have that great of a relationship with. Not that I dislike them or anything like that. I just don't really know them that well because I've only been here a couple of weeks. So that to me, I thought was pretty cool. I think it's a pretty solid room when it comes to that type of thing for the Mets. You could gripe about other things or like whatever, but like they have a pretty good room in terms of just like good character people in there and just genuinely good people when it comes to baseball and when it comes to becoming a good teammate.
There was a cool part in your piece after Tong's start against the Padres where you mentioned the fact that the team was really not concerned, but they were watching intently how well he was able to get over that Ranger start mentally. And he basically not sulk for a day, but he dwelled on it. And then they said 2 days later, he was back to preparation, had that same voracious attitude. Is that something that was a genuine concern where if they maybe 2-3 days after that start, they continue to see him dwelling? Do you think that could have changed whether or not he actually got the start against the Padres?
It's a good question. I mean, I had asked them pretty much right after that if he was still going to be in the mix for a start, and their answer was pretty much yes. So I think it would have had to have been like something drastic where that would have changed because, um, it just seemed to be like that was their plan all along was, hey, he's going to get this next start, and we're going to see from there. But I think it's a good point that you raised. It's a good question. It would probably be something where yeah, it would have to be pretty dramatic for that to occur. And I think part of the reason why they were optimistic was because they thought that this would be the case, right? Like they've known this kid for a while now, a couple of years. He's been in the organization. So he may be sort of new to Jeremy Hefner or Carlos Mendoza and some other people on the major league coaching staff, but he's not new to Eric Yeagers or other people in the Mets player development system who know him very, very well at this point and probably had a pretty firm idea of how he would respond to it.
It's been a lot of stories this year, just everything going on in the Mets world's pretty crazy, but especially on the pitching side, it feels like it's been in such flux. Do you think that the Mets expected Nolan McLean, Brandon Sproat, Jonah Tong, I don't even want to say to have the impact that they had, to be as good as they had when they called him up?
No, probably not. But I think that they probably figured that they would help. And when I spoke to people around the game, even not just with the Mets, but even sometimes with the Mets, around the trade deadline, like they pointed to these guys as like, okay, if we don't trade for a starting pitcher, look for these people to be in the mix here. So that from a couple months ago in early July, mid July, that was part of the thought process there as to like why they weren't so desperate maybe to add to their rotation or add a starting pitcher was because they felt like maybe one or two of these guys they'd be able to call on and they'd be able to help, particularly Sproat and McLean. Tong was not necessarily part of that equation until a little bit further out. Like I don't think that he was part of that. I think it was more like even like Blade Tidwell being part of that conversation rather than Jonah Tong at the time that I'm talking about when I was reporting it, because he was in double A and just the odds of him continuing to be that dominant to force their hand and to create that conversation just didn't really seem realistic at the time. But yeah, I think that they've definitely obviously surpassed expectations at this point. I mean, I don't think anyone could really say that they expected Nolan McLean to be as good as he has been. But I will say though that for the last couple of years, like the Mets people, and you could say maybe that they're biased or whatever because it's their own prospect, but like the Mets people were definitely more high on Nolan McLean than the rest of the industry. And I go back to even shortly after he was drafted that offseason, I always kind of put together like lists of like breakout prospects or where certain guys should be ranked or just my own personal thoughts. And I had multiple people tell me like, look, wherever you put Nolan McLean, it's not going to be high enough. And this was before he became the person that we all think of him as right now. And this was even before he dropped hitting. Like this was early in the process. So like, yeah, like they're going to like their own prospects a lot more than probably other teams would. But I figure in the case of McLean specifically, there were people in this organization who were very high on him from the jump.
Your season, your shot. The NFL season is rolling, and every touchdown can bring you closer to a payout with DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code FOUL. That's code FOUL to get $200 in bonus bets instantly when you place your first $5 bet. Plus, over $200 off NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. In partnership with DraftKings, the crown is yours.
Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort in Kansas, fees may apply in Illinois. 21 and over. Age and eligibility varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. Bonus bets expire 7 days after issuance. See sportsbook.draftkings.com/promos. NFL Sunday Ticket offer for new subscribers only and auto renews until canceled. Digital games and commercial use excluded. Restrictions apply. Additional NFL Sunday Ticket terms at youtube.com/go/NFL Sunday Ticket/terms. Limited time offer.
We kind of went through that too on this show because I remember that spring breakout game 2 years ago and we watched Nolan McLean throw that sweeper. It was like, oh, because you can clearly see the pitch characteristics of that pitch, the velocity, the spin, the movement. Like this would be a 99th percentile sweeper in the major leagues right now. This guy's barely even a pitcher at this point. So it did feel like And again, there were some other people in national media who continued to bash Mets pitching prospects. We kind of had to, all collectively as part of this Mets media world, had to defend these guys. Now they've come up. There's something else crazy about Nolan McLean. While he's been amazing on the field, he seems poised, serious, very just direct about everything he's doing. Just seems incredibly locked in all the time. Another piece you wrote recently about kind of the relationship of these three guys and how it's been built through the minor leagues, now continuing in the major leagues. Apparently, Nolan McLean is a bit of a jokester. He has an incredible sense of humor. Jonah Tong called him bubbly. Can you give any insight into these parts of Nolan McLean's personality that I don't think any Mets fans had any experience with so far?
Yeah, neither did I. I had no idea, but that was part of the appeal of like wanting to do that type of story. Was I went into it with an open mind. I said like, look, I kind of have a good idea of like who Jonah Tong is as a person, just because I had covered a couple of his starts in the minor leagues. I got to know him a little bit, and I don't think it takes too long with Jonah Tong to understand like who he is as far as his personality goes. He comes across very easy in that way.
Canadian.
But with McLean and Sproat, it's a little bit more cagey, or just a little bit more like you have to dig a little harder. I felt like to kind of see like what they're all about, what they believe in, who they are as people, what they care about, that sort of thing. And so for me, that was the appeal there, is because I didn't know what I was getting, especially with Nolan McLean. And yeah, come to find out, he is like this big jokester where apparently he's like the funniest person in the world, according to Jonah Tong. But then Brandon Sproat was quick to say, well, everyone's funny to Jonah Tong. So you have to really dig in and do your homework and find out why he's so funny. And I did. I got to talk with more people, and Brandon Sproat in particular branded up some funny things that McLean was saying. Some people would say like they're kind of like middle school humor. I found it funny myself. So maybe my bar is too low for it, but I thought it was pretty humorous, and I just thought it was really cool. And you're right, like McLean does not show that on the mound. He's very, I don't know if intense is the right word, but he just goes about his business.
Focused, maybe.
Yeah, like he just goes
Stern.
about his business, and like you just don't really anticipate like, oh, this guy's the one smacking sunflower seeds out of somebody's hand in the middle of a game during the dugout, just for kicks or something like that. But he is apparently. So I think it's important for the Mets going forward. I think it helps them right now because of these guys, like we said about Jonah Tong, they have like a lot of pressure on them as 22, 24, 25-year-old guys without any major league experience prior to last month. And so you don't really know how they're handling it day to day. So I felt like it was important to kind of get to know who they were. But also going forward, I just think it, as we saw last year, it's fun sometimes, even just from the outside, to have guys who are very likable on the roster. I think it makes it just more fun to watch unfold and see how the team kind of goes about its business. And it's cool to see like three guys just grow up together in the system and experience this kind of thing. And especially if they continue to have the success that appears maybe likely for them.
Has there been any noticeable change in the vibe in the clubhouse since those guys have been here? I mean, yesterday we saw Lindor, when Nemo hit the home run, he was on third and he basically like let out a scream of excitement. And that's stuff that we've seen from this team in the past, but it felt like at times during this year, it's a little bit tough because of how poorly they played for a bit, but it feels like we're starting to see a little more emotion, a little more excitement again from this team like 2024.
Yeah, I don't know if I would attribute it to the younger pitchers so much, just because like I felt like in that first game that McLean pitched against the Mariners, there was some of that to it, and that was visible and that was obvious. But as some people were kind of quick to point out to me within the Mets, like that type of thing could kind of just go away pretty quickly, or it's something that it's hard to hold on to because it is sort of organic and it's something that's in the moment and you're just reacting to it and having fun with it. And like, yeah, it can maybe motivate you for a couple of games, maybe even the rotation for that matter. But after a while, you need other things because after a while, like you may even get used to his success if he's that good, and maybe they already have. He has been that good. So like yes and no. I think like when they do take the mound, there is like this like palpable level of excitement to it because it's almost appointment viewing for these guys because you want to see what they're all about. But at the same time, this team has been pretty consistent with I think who they are and like what they're not. Like they haven't gotten too excited about big winning streaks or big losing streaks. And sometimes I feel like it's a good thing in some ways. Sometimes I feel like they could stand to get a little bit more emotional about some things. I'm not there though, so hard for me to say, or maybe wrong for me to say that because you don't know what you don't know. And I'm only privy to what I see and what people tell me. But yeah, I think sometimes I look at it and I'm like, okay, they've had this manager in Carlos Mendoza who is big on being the same person every day. Same thing with Francisco Lindor. He's big on saying, or people are big on saying about him, he is the same person every day. So I have a hard time then saying to myself, well, they've lost 8 in a row, so it's time for Lindor to be something different. If he's not that guy, he's not that type of guy who's going to stand up and order everybody around or something like that, or be that rah guy. Maybe they need that going forward. I'm not sure, but I don't know if like the younger pitchers have completely changed that dynamic. I think it's fair to say that they probably have helped it though, because it's that sort of you get that jolt of
Yeah.
youth or energy, and I don't think it could hurt, especially when they're pitching as well as they are.
Yeah, just a little bit more fun. I feel like having a couple
Mhm.
other young guys around. This team, though, has had some crazy highs and lows this season. From what you've seen being around them, is there a low moment that you've noticed? Like, we know that the image they put forth is the same guy every day, like you just said, Mendoza and Lindor, basically the two leaders in this clubhouse. But as they've had multiple 7-8 game losing streaks, have been backs against the wall in this wild card race, a position based on the talent they really should not be in at all. Has there been a low moment that you've just seen with these guys internally?
Yeah, a couple come to mind. I think in Milwaukee, what was that, like last month, like
Yeah,
shortly
July.
after the trade deadline, we saw some guys, Lindor in particular, sort of lose their cool in ways that
Yeah.
they usually don't. Right? We saw him slam his glove a few times that game. Upset with himself for making the error, I think it was. He just had an all around bad game and a string of just lackluster performances. And he was not alone there. I think Soto showed emotion, a lot of emotion, other players as well. Francisco Alvarez, there were other guys, right? So I think that comes to mind as one where they were in the middle of a tough stretch there, one of their tough stretches. And that was a low point for my eyes. There's also been times you walk in the clubhouse, it's a little bit more quiet than usual. I suspect maybe somebody had something to say, although people would not confirm that. But recently in Philadelphia, that comes to mind, where you walked into that clubhouse that final game and it felt like, okay, this is a little bit more different. And sometimes that stuff doesn't really come out until after the season, or sometimes that comes out when they turn things around. And like you hear, like, okay, somebody's a little bit more interested in talking about that at that time. But I'm not really sure like why those particular things happened, or like why I felt that way. Maybe I'm wrong with it, but I got the sense that those moments were particularly low for this group. And unfortunately for them, they've had multiple occurrences. Even the Pirates series, obviously,
Yeah.
that was a tough
Forgot
one
that one.
too. That you knew for sure that when that loss occurred, it was going to be one of those team meeting days. And so I remember standing outside the Pittsburgh visiting clubhouse in the tunnel in the basement of the stadium. And I just knew right when I got there that I'd be standing there for a good 15, 20 minutes, because it just had that feeling. And sure enough, that's what it was. So there's been a few of those for the Mets' sake. Hopefully, with 9 games left as we're talking, they don't have too many more or any more. But there have been a few low points for this group for sure.
What happens, like, from your perspective after like one of those team meetings? Like, how is it just everyone's silent, like at their spot in the clubhouse, and it's just kind of like tough to get answers out of people? What's the vibe?
Well, sometimes actually, or a lot of times, there's nobody in the room by the time we're allowed in the room. So like that makes it extremely hard, right? Like there's only a couple of guys who are actually there to even talk to, or even volunteer talking to, or the PR staff could corral to get them to talk to us. And then other times after a meeting, guys are very talkative. I think it kind of depends on how that goes and like what the state of the team is at that particular point. For that one in Pittsburgh, there were some guys who were still lingering in the clubhouse, Lindor, Nimmo, other guys as well. That one was a little bit different because from what I gathered, there was like 8 to 10 dudes who stood up and talked to the room, including some younger players like a Ronnie Mauricio and that kind of thing, which I thought was kind of unusual, actually. But maybe that says some good things about their team. I don't know. But they all kind of vary. But for the most part, you don't really get a good read on like exactly how that went until you start those conversations. And a lot of times you have to start those conversations kind of privately and sometimes even like well after the fact, really, because part of it as just human beings, like we want it to register too, though. I feel like sometimes, right? Like in the raw in the raw scene of it, like maybe you think it went really well, but then 3 days later, you're like, okay, maybe that got lost in translation, or you don't really know. So I think like if you're having like honest conversations with guys, sometimes that's happening, and not even just with the Mets, any team that you cover as a reporter, that's happening days after the fact. And like you're checking in on it and you're kind of seeing like, okay, like did this go as well as you thought it did? And was this the message that you thought was received? How have people responded to it? And you don't really get that read until a few days after.
Hey, if you're a card collector or you're looking to collect, buy, sell, trade, Arena Club's the spot. And I'm going to tell you why. Because the old process, AJ, was very clunky. Buy a box, rip the pack, tons of commons, send it in for grading. And then finally, you get everything back. This is weeks and weeks, and you can start to try and sell the card. We have eliminated that with Arena Club, or they have. I act like I'm part of it, but in really one step.
Arena's your one-stop shop for everything. You get a card, you open a slab pack, the card is there, it's graded, it spins around coolly, shows you 3D, the front, the back, you can look at the corners, you can look at everything, and then you get a decision. Do I want to keep it? Do I want to sell it? Do I want to trade it? It gives you an instant offer. You can buy it back and re-rip another slab pack and try for something else, or you can keep it and hope the value goes up and sell it at a later date. It is truly the best spot to get cards.
20% off your first slab pack or card purchase can be had right now at arenaclub.com/FOUL and use code FOUL.
Yeah, thinking about that team meeting that they had after Philly, and then the possible team meeting they had after Philly, then you go into the first game against the Rangers and give up 6 in the first inning. That kind of feels like maybe you do need a couple of days to see if that actually sticks. But bringing some of this conversation back to on the field, another pitcher who has probably been the most disappointing player in this team this season, Kodai Senga, went down to the minor leagues, had one great start, one poor start. Carlos Mendoza was non-committal on what Senga's role would be, if any, for the rest of the season. Is there any indication either way on if we see him again, if we should see him again, if we want to see him again?
I think it's possible. I spoke with people before that last start, and they were raising I was talking and I was just saying, like, okay, I think that he's probably still part of the equation here. And part of that is because like they don't really have too many other great options, right? Like David Peterson has been inconsistent lately. He looked for a long part of the season like a game 1 or a game 2 guy. Now, not so much, right? Like that has kind of changed that conversation. Yes, with the younger players, especially with McLean, you sort of pencil him in as the guy. But we still have some starts to go for Brendan Sproat. We still have some outings to go for Jonah Tong. So I'm not ready to put either of those guys in ink quite yet. If I'm the Mets, we have to wait to get more information. And then with the piggyback situation, it worked out well. But it was one time where they tried it and it worked out. So we don't really know 100% how they feel about it. But with Senga, I think that they would love for him to be part of it just because of the pure stuff. But he's somebody that, as we know now, years into his Mets tenure, you kind of know that like he has to have things like just right. Like some people would call it being a perfectionist. Some people would call it being like delicate. Like there has to be a level of like these things need to feel right for me to be successful. And I don't know if you could really go into the playoffs with that. It's tough, right? Because we saw that last year when they tried it. It didn't really work that great. Like they rolled the dice on it because of the pure stuff that he has, and rightfully so. And again, they were in a situation where he probably was one of, if not their best option to when you given all the choices and weighing everything, all the values, he presented a pretty high reward for you if it came to fruition. But the risk was also there, right? And I think it's the same sort of situation or a similar situation in this case. And I think it probably depends a lot on where you are. Like, do you need certain guys who are pitching maybe game 161, 162, who otherwise would be your game 1 or game 2 guys? Or are you in a situation next week where you're able to line things up a little bit more the way that you want them to be aligned? And then I don't think there's that much of a need to roll the dice on someone like Senga, because he has yet to show you these last couple months since returning to the injured list that he could be the guy from the first half.
You briefly mentioned the piggyback situation, something we've been clamoring for on the podcast for months now. It's just like, it's not working. We need to make a change. Something that we saw David Stearns do a lot in Milwaukee was be creative with how that roster was constructed, how he went about pitching, and everything over there was just a little bit different. Of course, the Mets have more money. Have you seen any changes from David Stearns when you were covering the Brewers to David Stearns now with the Mets?
Yeah, I have. I'd have to think a little bit more on like what exactly they are. I think with the pitching staff, the thing to come to mind, because I think like the conversation sometimes is like, well, why didn't they just do this a few
Yes.
months ago, right? And I think that's a valid criticism, and it's a good question to raise. Not really in defense of the Mets, but I think the other argument is, well, I think that the best case scenario was for Sean Manaea to be the guy who gives you 6 innings. And I think that they probably wanted to give him a leash where he could show that he could be that guy until it was obvious he couldn't. And maybe they went a little bit long with it, maybe too long with it. But at the same time, like they also built this bullpen at the trade deadline where they sort of said to themselves, maybe we don't really need these long outings too. Like maybe we can get 4 or 5 innings with these guys and then just hand it off and let our bullpen go to work. That also hasn't happened. So I think like those two tracks of thought were going on there, and they also were kind of valid in their thinking. It didn't work out. Like it just wasn't good enough. The bullpen just it isn't as deep as it should be. It isn't as good as it should be. And then Manaea has had his struggles and his inconsistencies before his last maybe 1.5 outings or so. So I understand like why they wouldn't have done it before that. Although I would have personally done it. I would have actually called up McLean earlier as well. I'm not the one making those decisions, of course, but I just think that I just say that because I do think that there are valid concerns or criticisms there to say like, well, why didn't they just do this beforehand? There are reasons for it, like especially like if you're shortening up someone like Manaea or you're shortening up someone like Clay Holmes and you're asking him to go even shorter than he already is. It's hard then to just suddenly ask him, okay, now we need 6 innings from you because X player is injured or we don't feel like we have the depth to pull this off start after start. So I feel like there is a part of the season where you have to reach where you have to commit to this as an idea, and it's pretty hard to do that in mid-August. It really is.
Yeah, we've made the analogy recently. I don't know if you've ever watched Breaking Bad, but there's the scene where later seasons where Walt and Jesse steal the methylamine off of the chemical train. And the things are going awry. The people are getting back in the train, but Walt's like, I'm not leaving. I have to wait till the last possible moment to do this. And it kind of feels like sometimes that David Stern might act like that just because he knows where this team's playoff odds have been despite the big losing streaks. Like it's kind of the disconnect between the public thought and the in the league thought where like what Jerry DiPolo said a few years ago, like our goal is 54% and get to the dance. Like that's not what we want to hear as fans, but in a way of actually running this team and thinking about it, it's like I can wait to the last possible second to see if Sean Manaea can be himself. Next question here, to see if a guy like Ryan Helsley can possibly be themselves, because I can take so many chances because no matter what, we're not catching the Phillies, and probably these teams in wild card race are not catching us. So it's like you can afford yourself a painful second half for all of us to watch all of these things fail over and over again. Well, at the end of the day, we win 83 games and make the playoffs by 1.
Yeah, I think that to the question about like how has David Stearns kind of changed or what he's done differently, for me, his calling cards have always been sort of competing ones where sometimes I find him to be not reactive, but I find him to make moves earlier than some GMs do. We saw that last year with a series of moves he made when it was, going to Luis Torrens as the backup catcher, just making some different changes, installing Jose Iglesias as a bigger part of the major league roster. Those kind of things we saw him do early on. There was also good reason for that because, like you mentioned, the standings were completely different back then last year, and I saw him do that with the Brewers when I covered him back then when he traded for Willy Adames in May and pulled off the type of trade that most GMs do not pull off at that time of year. But the other part of it, the competing one, is always his patience. I've always found him to be somebody who is pretty patient with certain players or certain trends, and in those senses, sometimes he does not react as quickly as like a particular fan base would want him to, or a fan base of that team would want him to. And for the most part, it pays off. You could go back and forth whether some of them this year have or haven't. But yeah, I feel like it's been sort of a mixed as far as results go for him. And I don't know. I I go back and forth on it myself with like whether or not he's had a good year or he hasn't, because I liked what they did in the offseason. I
Same.
liked what they did at the trade deadline,
Yeah.
but it hasn't worked, right? Like a lot of it hasn't worked out the way that we thought it would work out. And so clearly that's not good, right? So
Yeah.
I have a hard time sort of going in my head of like, okay, is this a good job or is it not a good job? So it's a tough one to analyze and provide analysis on.
For a guy like Cedric Mullins or even Helsley, guys who came from smaller markets and came to New York and struggled pretty much instantly, is there? I mean, there's no other way to say it. Like, is there anything that you've noticed? Like, does the New York scene, does the media, does it actually have this big of an impact? Can you see it weighing on these guys?
Well, there's that, but I also like point to the idea that these guys also were never traded before, like in general, to
True.
anywhere, let
Yeah.
alone New York City. And I think that even for guys who are veterans and who have been in this league a long time, that could hit you a certain way where if you're Cedric Mullins and you're especially coming from the American League,
Yeah.
where like, yeah, we see these teams more thanks to the commissioner more than we do before, but like it's still a different league and we still don't see them as frequently as we do teams in the NL East, right? So a lot of these guys, like they don't know that Cedric Mullins is any good.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh,
yeah,
of
they
course.
do and they
Yeah.
don't, right? Like they
Yeah.
know who he is, that kind of thing, but they've never really seen him play every day. Like they don't know his capabilities. They're not aware of like this hot stretch that he went on for the Baltimore Orioles. It's also not really relevant. Like he has to continue to like prove himself here. And I think those guys do feel that actually. Like you come into a new clubhouse, you want guys to understand like, hey, this is what I'm good at, this is what I'm about. They may not say that publicly, but I feel like that's probably part of their thought process. Like as human beings, you want to sort of say, I bring value to this room, and like you want people to acknowledge that. And when you're trading for guys who have never been traded before, I think that sometimes that's part of it. And I wonder sometimes like how much of a part of the calculus that was in those particular cases where you don't really know how they would have reacted, let alone to the New York market, but just
Yeah.
being on a different team, a different organization in general. You want to say like, okay, these guys are professionals, they're going to perform and it's not going to really matter. But you have a hard time doing that. Like when you're talking about like, hey, we're all human beings. Like these guys are not robots. So like if you acknowledge that part of it, then you also say like, okay, like they're going to be human. They're going to be professionals. And they're just going to handle it. It doesn't really jive. I think you have to get to know the player a little bit more. And so I'm curious about how much homework they did on the particular players and like how they would react to certain things because clearly they were surprised by Ryan Helsley's performance for the Mets. Right? They would not
Yeah.
have traded the prospects that they traded for him if they thought that there was a chance of him having this as part of like the you know chances of like bringing him into the Mets. Like was this something that was on anyone's radar? Probably not,
Hell
right? Like
no.
to be this
Don't think so.
bad. It's been something that has been worse than anybody could imagine for somebody
Yeah.
that's been very good for a long time and that probably will be very good after this season wraps up, unfortunately, whether it's for the Mets or anybody else. Like he's going to probably be just fine for his career. He's
Oh
had
yeah.
a very solid career, a very good career. So, I question a lot of the process of getting these guys beyond knowing that they're good at what they do. Like who were they as people and how much that mattered.
He might be a lights out closer for the Texas Rangers next season. But
Yeah.
as we've run out of options, basically of any meaningful right handers besides Diaz and Rogers, who are now the absolute ninth and eighth inning guys in this bullpen, is there any hope that Helsley has something figured out internally? Do they think the tipping is over? Because we've seen him have a couple scoreless outings recently. They haven't been clean scoreless outings. One was a double with a guy getting doubled off, and he picked off Fernando Tatis again in the Padres series. Is there any hope whatsoever that he can at least be a decent, if he can match Reed Garrett's first half for the next week and possibly in a playoff series?
There's hope because there's still some time left for it. There's like just enough time, right? Because you're talking about 9 games and maybe that's a few appearances. So if he puts together a few appearances that completely change our minds on like what he's been able to do so far, then sure, I think that he becomes part of it. But to your point, like he hasn't really had too many of those in a row, right? Like he'll have one and then you scratch your head and be like, okay, like how did this happen again 2 days later? So that's been his problem. I think the tipping part is for the most part behind him. Like most of the time, like when I talk to Mets people, they do say it's behind him, that they have figured things out. But I wonder about like just the subconscious part of that sometimes. And I've spoken to Ryan about it, and he's said like, yeah, I have a hard time because it's something that I'm doing something now that I haven't done before, and so
Yeah.
sometimes it creeps in my mind, and it's hard. It's hard to just be like, okay, I shouldn't be doing that, or that thing that I was doing, make sure I'm not doing that. And sometimes it could impact your mechanics, I guess. Sometimes it's just something that's hard to get out of your mind. So yeah, it's hard to place a bet on Ryan Helsley reverting to form, right?
Yeah.
And it's a problem for a team that doesn't have as many guys, like you said, who are right-handers who you really trust in those situations, especially after Reed Garrett's injury. I know he wasn't having that great of a season, but he was having a fairly solid season, and he was somebody that Mendoza clearly felt comfortable deploying in key situations. So I think between Helsley and Stanek, like you're hoping for one of those guys to get on a big run, but they've both been inconsistent, to put it mildly. And beyond them, there aren't a whole lot of options. Actually, I'm a little bit surprised that they haven't tried Dylan Ross in
I was going to just
AAA.
ask that.
He's been somebody that's been pretty good for Syracuse, and he's been good in the minor leagues all season. He also needs to be added to the 40-man roster after the season for Rule 5 purposes anyway. So I was kind of surprised by that. But at the same time, like he has also had some command issues.
Yeah.
And that's something that would pop up in the major leagues too. So sure, it looks good in Syracuse, but when the lights come on and it's a big game in a key spot, are you really trusting somebody who's had those sort of command issues? Probably not. So all that to say, like, that's where they're at. Like it's Rogers and it's the left-handers and it's Diaz, and that's not so much of a problem in the postseason because of the days off and like the short series and the fact that your season's over if you're not going to win that game anyway.
Yeah.
But it could be problematic if your lead goes back to 1.5 games in the wild card or trims to a half game, or if you find yourself in a bad situation where you're losing games in a row, then yeah, it's very problematic for this team. But at least for the postseason, if they get there, it shouldn't be that much of an issue or as much of an issue as it is right now.
Before we let you go, Will, first off, thank you for joining us. We really do appreciate it. Give the people at home a little bit of a heat check, a vibe check of what's going on here, how the Mets are looking and feeling over these last few games of the season.
Well, things are a lot different. And I feel like in September, like things could change so quickly, right? From one week to the next. We're seeing that almost on a weekly basis with the Mets. But I feel like this is a team that believes that they're going to be in the postseason firmly, 100%. I don't think that there's that much doubt from there, the people in that room. I do feel like when I get to talking with them, even like when they were going through that losing streak recently, and I was being like, I don't know about this, guys. They were more like, nah, I think that things will be fine. I also will say, I don't think those other teams are any good. Like
Yeah, that's the
those
other
teams are
thing.
just not very good. I can't name off the top of my head 2 relievers on the Diamondbacks roster right now who are
Andrew
healthy.
Salfrank? No?
Well, that would be the one. I'm talking about 2. And even him, he's like someone that's like, okay, where was he pitching last year? Who knows? So it's just they created this sort of mess of a race, if you want to call it that. Like it was of their own creation. So I think that they acknowledge that and they're aware of that, but they also have this confidence, and rightfully so. At certain points of the season, I've wondered if it's a false confidence, and it's almost something like that's been a problem of like, okay, like if you continue to say you're this talented, maybe that allows you to subconsciously put things in cruise control when you really shouldn't be. I've wondered about that, but they've been quick to say, no, you're wrong, because that means that you're telling us that our preparation is off, and it's not been off. And we have been taking this seriously. And so, okay, I raise my hands and I say, well, that's me being wrong then, if that's the case. So yeah, I feel like they're in a good spot as far as mentally goes to withstand this. I think that they call on their postseason experience too when it comes down to it. Like you're talking about guys who have been here before, who have been in bad situations, particularly with the Mets, and who have experienced this sort of thing, for better or worse. I think in this case, it probably will be for better, you would think, that they've been able to navigate this. So I think that the vibe is still it's pretty good right now. But like I said at the beginning, things can change really quickly, and they have changed repeatedly in September.
All right, Will, Sammon, thank you so much. Let the people at home know where they can find you and all your stuff. Appreciate you coming on Messed Up.
Yeah, appreciate it, guys. Thank you. I'm on X and Blue Sky at Will Sammon on X and at theathletic.com. Me and Tim Britton cover the Mets for the company. And we have a bunch of stuff coming out this week, obviously setting the stage for what's at stake for the Mets and heading into their final 9 games with 3 final ones at home against the Nationals and then the upcoming road trip. And then we'll have the postseason well covered as well. So again, thanks for having me on, guys. Do appreciate it.
Thanks for coming on, guys. Make sure you're following us on all our social media at Mets'd Up. Subscribe to the Mets'd Up Podcast YouTube channel if you want to watch the video version of this. And if you're listening to us, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, drop us a rating, drop us a review, download, and subscribe. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you for watching. We'll catch you on the next episode. Peace out.
Peace out, guys. Let's go Mets.